Obviously, George Bush has to deal with the government debt, and soon. But how? What will he do or try to do? And what will the Democratic Congress let him do? And how will the Democrats break their losing streak of 5 out of the last 6 elections? In other words, what is the country in for? We'll ask today's guests. Robert Teeter, co-director of the George Bush Transition Team. Senator Bennett Johnston, Democrat, Louisiana, of the Appropriations and Budget Committees and a candidate for Senate Majority Leader. Senator-elect Charles Robb, Democrat, Virginia, founding director of the Democratic Leadership Council. Peter Hart, Democratic analyst and pollster. And Michael Barone, editorial staff member of the Washington Post and author of the Almanac of American Politics. Some background from our man Jack Smith. And our discussion here with George Will, Sam Donaldson, and Cokie Roberts, all here on our Sunday program. Algiers today are said to have agreed to accept Resolution 242, which calls implicitly for the recognition of Israel. The Palestinian Parliament in exile met in Algiers to issue a declaration of independence, they said, for the West Bank occupied by Israel. And in doing this, in drawing up a formula for a PLO peace plan, a majority agreed to accept 242. 242 was voted by the United Nations in 1967, and it says all nations in that area have the right to live within secure and recognized borders, including Israel. Alan Steen is an American held hostage now in Beirut for almost 2 years, and today his wife has a letter from the Internal Revenue Service saying he has not paid his income taxes and threatening to prosecute him. The computer's at work again. We'll be back with all the rest of today's program in a moment. Should have won, and there is argument about why they didn't, while the Republicans and President Bush will have to deal with the fact that while they won the White House, the Democrats won, not only held control of Congress, but increased it. There are many possibilities for conflict. Before we look into all of this, here's some background from Jack Smith. Jack?
David, it was a decisive victory, an 8% margin in the popular vote, but George Bush won 426 electoral votes to Dukakis's 112. For the country, it spells continuity. For Democrats, the prospect of disarray, and for the president-elect, some immediate problems with the democratically controlled Congress, where for the first time in 28 years, the party losing the White House, the Democrats in this case, actually gained seats.
I'll do my level best to reach out and work constructively with the United States Congress.
Bush extended the olive branch, but Democrats predicted trouble.
I think he'll have a difficult time governing because of the way the campaign was run.
So there's not going to be the sweet honeymoon sometimes presidents enjoy.
Even Bob Dole, the Republican Senate Minority Leader, seemed unfriendly.
Well, I was disappointed. I mean,
He complained openly Bush had done too little to help GOP Senate candidates and hinted Bush may be unable to avoid raising taxes.
I'm not advocating a tax increase. I'm just trying to be realistic in this business, and I'm not going to be the one who's going to go down and tell George Bush you ought to raise taxes.
If any issue promises immediate and familiar conflict next year with the Congress, it is the federal deficit Bush inherits from President Reagan.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
He made the promise so often, it's hard to see how he can back down. Indeed, both stocks and the dollar uncharacteristically fell after the GOP's election victory. And Democrats made it clear that without some give on revenues, they'll not strike any budget deals with George Bush.
If you basically are saying that it can't be revenue, it can't be defense, it's all got to come out of domestic program, we'll never get there. It won't happen. And so you'll have major conflict.
If the president-elect and his party face potential trouble up here on Capitol Hill next year, the opposition Democrats have more immediate problems. A possible war within their party as they pick up the pieces after Tuesday's defeat.
I think we may well have blown an historic opportunity.
The recriminations are already starting, and they are likely to be bitter, for this was an election most Democrats thought they could win.
I think we need to have it out now. We need to thrash out what our problems are, why we've lost 5 out of the last 6 presidential elections, 4 of the last 5 by landslides.
The party is on its worst losing streak since the Civil War, and demographic trends will make matters worse in the 1990s when reapportionment moves more electoral votes into the GOP-dominated Sun Belt.
I gave it my best shot.
Some blame Dukakis and his aides for running a poor campaign, but most say the problem goes deeper.
I think the Democratic Party is suffering because it is identified with some of the more extreme reaches of liberalism, weak on defense, soft on crime. The party has a problem with those issues, and they're going to have to do something about it.
Not everyone agrees. In the last days before the election, when Dukakis quit concealing his liberalism, his campaign seemed to catch fire.
At that point, liberal label and all, he began to move upward.
Jackson is now the de facto leader of the party's progressive wing, which sees the defeat quite differently. Dukakis lost because he wasn't liberal enough. A battle, perhaps even a bloodbath, between the left and the right is now shaping up over the future course of the Democratic Party. Bush, meanwhile, moved swiftly to form his administration, naming as the first member of the Bush cabinet his campaign chairman, the former Treasury Secretary, James Baker.
The personal respect in which he is held will allow him again to demonstrate the highest standards of performance as our next Secretary of State.
Bush named two other top campaign aides to head his transition team, pollster Robert Teeter and strategist Craig Fuller. Both will reportedly get top White House staff jobs, as may New Hampshire Governor John Sununu, a troika perhaps like the one that ran the White House in Reagan's first term. Among the few officials who may stay on is Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady. General Brent Scowcroft, National Security Advisor under Gerald Ford, is said to be up for the same post again. And at defense, former Texas Senator John Tower has been mentioned, though some are said to favor a managerial type like Paul O'Neill, the president of Alcoa. As he began shaping his new administration, Bush gave few hints of what direction it might take. But what's expected is continuity in both foreign and domestic affairs.
I don't think there should be a lot of surprises. Philosophically, the Bush administration is going to continue to move in the same direction that we've moved in the last 8 years.
The prize that George Bush sought is now his, and so are all its problems. But for all of them he now faces, with the Congress, the deficit with the Soviet Union, he can take some cheer. At least Republicans are not getting set to tear each other to pieces. David?
Jack, thank you. Coming next, Michael Barone, author of The Almanac of American Politics, and Peter Hart, a Democratic analyst and pollster. And shortly, Senator-elect Charles Robb of Virginia and Senator Bennett Johnston, Democrat of Louisiana, and Robert Teeter of the George Bush transition team. In a moment. Happy to have you with us. A lot to talk about. Here in the studio with us are George Will of ABC News and Sam Donaldson, ABC News White House correspondent. Now, a question for both of you. There's talk of a mandate. I'm not sure I know what that means, and I'm not sure anyone does, but Mr. Bush won the presidency. The Democrats won almost everything else. What does that tell you about the next 4 years?
I think what we're going to see, David, is a lot of checks and balances coming over the next 4 years. Quite frankly, I think the Democrats in the Congress are going to read a counter mandate. We did well, we ran on our issues, and Mr. Bush is going to have to work with us, and I think Mr. Bush will read things as, I won the presidency, I got the 400 electoral votes. I think both sides are going to read something into this election, and I think we talk about battles. I think we're going to see battles down the road between the Congress and the president.
Checks and balances, probably more checks than balances?
I would think so.
Mr. Barone?
Well, I think voters are continuing to vote for divided government. We've had this phenomenon throughout the 1980s. They want to have some restraint on people in power. George Bush, I think, has something of a mandate for his basic policies on defense and on taxes. People seem to see a difference between him and the Democrats, and they voted for him. But I think that both parties have their sets of intellectual theorists that have ideas that they'd like to impose on the rest of the country, and I think the voters are a little wary of both of those sets of theorists, and they put the Democrats back in the Congress to keep hold of the Republicans in the executive.
Mr. Barone, the Democrats have two sets of intellectual theorists, and they're the message theorists and the tactics theorists. And they're those who, in this quadrennial exercise of explaining why they lost, there's those who say the message is wrong, and those who say the tactics were wrong. If we'd had better advertising, if we'd gone to Pennsylvania, things could have been different. Who's right?
Well, I think the people who say that the basic message is wrong are the ones that have the better argument. Every campaign makes mistakes, and you can always pinpoint in a losing campaign, they lost half a point here by doing this, or they lost half a point there by doing that. But when you lose 40 out of the 50 states, I think the messages are getting through and the voters aren't buying them.
Mr. Hart, give them the silver lining. That is, what's the best, most encouraging message the Democrats at the presidential level can read from these results?
I think there's one encouraging lining out of this, and that is if you go across the northern tier of states, let's take from Vermont right straight through sort of Washington, Oregon, and down to California. 8 years ago, we got 36% of the vote as Democrats. Moved up to 42% in 1984, and now it's up to 48%. That's the good news. The problem is you go south and you look and it's a sea of red, and it's 155 electoral votes, none for the Democrats.
Mr. Brune, you see in this pattern of states something like an old American minority. That is, we've had this in the past, but it never became a majority. Explain that.
Well, if you go back to the 1920s, 60 years ago, an era of Republican dominance, what you see is little patches of progressive, as it was then called, sentiment. You saw it in the East Coast cities. Dukakis carried New York and Massachusetts. You saw it up in Bob LaFollette's Midwest. Dukakis carried Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. And you saw it on the West Coast progressive movements where Dukakis ran well, carried 2 states on the West Coast, came very close in Ronald Reagan's California. The bad news for the Democrats is that that isn't yet a majority, as Peter says. You've got to get the big factory states that the Democrats used to think of being naturally democratic. And if you go and say, blue-collar workers, I'm on your side, vote for me. Those states went for George Bush. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, all went for George Bush in this campaign.
Well, let's talk about the L word. There's a theory around that you can't run as a liberal anymore. But I don't know a lot of people who agree with that. Tell me about this. In 1992, does the Democratic Party nominate someone who says, as Mr. Dukakis tried to say till the very end, no, labels don't matter? Or do they nominate someone who says, yes, I'm a liberal, but I'll define it. I'm a liberal in the following ways?
I think the policies that have worked historically for liberals, you go back to the years after World War II and the GI Bill of Rights, FHA house building mortgage bill, what worked for them are policies that help people become upwardly mobile, that give people a bit of an edge who are building homes, who are educating themselves, forming new communities. Democrats need to find new policies like that for the 1990s.
Does it have to be a Southerner?
No, I don't think it has to be a Southerner, but boy, you have to have somebody that can reach into the South. I mean, Kevin Phillips said it. There's an outline for a majority for the Democrats out of this election. But unless you can reach into those growing cities, the Columbuses and the Kansas Cities of the world, we're going to have a difficult time. And it seems to me that part of this is the ability to talk to white Protestants. Half of all voters are white Protestants. What did we get this time around? 33%. You can't put it together that way. And Michael's right. You have to talk about things that they care about, which says, we're going to help you. There was a lot in terms of daycare. And what Bob Teeter will tell you is what the Republicans sought to do and did it well is they cut down the differences. We should have been on top of them, and it's more than tactics, it is message, and you've got to be on top of that message.
But I want to ask more about this message. Do you have to give up support for the Bill of Rights? You have to say, I'm no longer against unreasonable searches and seizures. I'm no longer for reading the suspects their rights. I don't want to be called soft on crime, so let's get in there and lock them up. I mean, how do you say you're not soft on crime, but at the same time maintain a traditional liberal stance in favor of civil liberties?
Well, I think that obviously you can take some positions on civil liberties that are perfectly acceptable to the voters, but as a general proposition, it's against the advantage of the Democrats to make that their central issue. Their advantage is to focus on issues that work for them, and if they've got mandatory sentencing things or stuff they want to back, fine. But they need to direct it at stuff that helps
Can
them.
you project an idea that you are not soft on defense without simply saying, I'm for every weapon system ever proposed?
Yeah, absolutely, and the Republicans are going to have to do that anyway. But see, the Democrats had to reassure voters on 2 fronts, on personal safety front and on national defense front. We knew it, we talked about it a year ago, and we didn't do it. And that becomes a problem.
Well, was that Dukakis?
It's in part Dukakis.
I mean, you say the message, Mr. Barone, but is it not a fact that some other Democrat this year running as a liberal, but defining himself and his goals in the way you're trying to do this morning, might well have won.
Well, one tantalizing question that some people raise is if the ticket had been in alphabetical order, if Lloyd Bentsen had been the candidate for president, Michael Dukakis the candidate for vice president, could that ticket have won? My answer is that it certainly could have come closer.
George,
Mr. Hart, you said in answer to Sam's question, you said the next nominee doesn't have to be a Southerner, but he has to be able to carry the South. The Democrats this year put their convention in the South, had Super Tuesday to run all their candidates through the South early in the process, picked their running mate from the South. The South said, we don't care. Those are cosmetics. Is the South perhaps going to insist upon the top of the ticket?
Oh, I don't know that it will. It needs somebody that can talk to them. And we saw this in terms of the early polling. If you can't talk to them, then you're not going to carry them. Bennett Johnston and Chuck Robb will give you some of those answers.
Mr. Hart, thank you. Mr. Barone, thank you. Thanks very much for coming. Pleasure to have you. Come again. Coming next, Senator-elect Charles Robb, Democrat, Virginia, who thinks the Democratic Party needs a new direction, and Senator Bennett Johnston, Democrat, Louisiana, a candidate for Senate Majority Leader, and shortly, Robert Teeter of the Bush Transition Team. In a moment. Soon to be Senator Robb and Senator Johnston, thank you both for coming. Delighted to have you. You're a former governor and soon to be senator now. The first ugly, nasty job awaiting George Bush and the Congress is the deficit and what to do about it. Let's hear some ideas. Do you have some?
Well, I think, first of all, it's clear that President Bush is going to have to provide leadership. I know that he has taken several things off the table, and that's going to make it more difficult, frankly.
Social Security and...
I think it's going to involve the entire domestic spending program. I think he's going to have to look at the entitlement question. I think he's going to have to look at the defense procurement question. I think ultimately he's going to have to look at the revenue side if we can't make it up on the expenditure side.
Senator Johnson?
Well, there's no question revenues must be a part of it. That's not a question of philosophy. That's a question of mathematics. There's a time bomb with a fuse lit, and it's called the interest on the debt. We have to extend that probably in May, and it takes 60 votes to do that, to overcome the filibuster. That's traditionally been the vehicle that's been used to extract some kind of fiscal sanity from the administration. So unless the George Bush administration has done something to bring that deficit down, which will include revenues, the bomb goes off in May. You can't spend any more money because you can't borrow any more money.
So let's be fair about this. Now, Congress has a good deal of the responsibility for this huge deficit. You guys did vote the money.
Well, we voted less, actually, than President Reagan asked for, but we're not saying it's not a joint endeavor. But what President Bush has said during the campaign is no taxes, that in effect he adopted the Democratic platform, education, the environment, health care, and yet says we don't have to have taxes to pay for it, and that won't work. It's not mathematically feasible.
Mr. Robb?
It seems to me that this is an area where you're clearly going to have executive leadership. You can talk about the joint role, and clearly the Congress appropriates the money. But if the chief executive isn't willing to walk the plank with the Congress, there are very few members of Congress who are going to get out and going to simply watch the commander-in-chief standing on the side as they go over the
sink below the waves.
That's exactly right. And he's got to provide leadership.
I think the Congress wants to work with this president, but we're going to require him to lead before we do it.
Senator Johnson, your soon-to-be colleague seems to be saying, read my lips, Bush goes first. That is, the Democrats are not going to propose a tax increase no matter what.
Very well put.
Now, if that is your position, you say we'll come up against this debt ceiling in May or so. What if the president just sits there, doesn't propose anything?
Well, it's going to be a train wreck. And
that sounds interesting.
You see in the past.
No survivors?
Well, that's why.
But everyone bears responsibility for a train wreck. You can't sit back there in the coach and say, well, that engineer didn't do it right, let's all die.
Well, for my part, I'm saying to the president, you ought to convene a summit and put everything on the table. Economic summit.
But
including taxes. Including taxes.
How can he? The president-elect said one clear thing during this campaign, no taxes. How can he put that on the table without
Well, it's like that old story that when Earl Long was governor of Louisiana, and he overpromised during the campaign, and he couldn't deliver, and they said, what must I tell him? Tell him I lied. Well, the president needs to at least say he overpromised.
Nobody can understand American politics without knowing something about Earl Long.
That's exactly right.
Go ahead.
But you wanted to comment on that.
That's all right.
Okay. Well, I'd like to get back to the election for just a minute. You're both Southerners. Suppose a Southerner had run this time. Suppose, say, Sam Nunn had run. And you look at the states and you say, these states Dukakis lost that Nunn would have won, and these states Dukakis won, but Nunn might not have lost any of them. Would you be about to inaugurate a president?
Yes.
If Nunn had run? Do you agree with that?
I think the chances are certainly a lot better. It's very clear, in keeping with the things that Michael and Peter said earlier, that you have to have an appeal to the South. You can't give up 155 electoral votes right off the top and expect to win the election.
Well, may I suggest, gentlemen, that Sam Nunn could not have been nominated by the Democratic Party? His record on labor, his record on women's rights, his record on civil rights. What makes you think that someone like Sam Nunn, or for that matter, any other senator, is going to be nominated in '92?
Sam, you're putting your finger on the real problem. It's a nomination problem, and it's a general election problem. Many of us have been working to try to find a way to make the nominating process more like the general election process, so that the same values, the same priorities would be evident and the same choices would be made, but we have been singularly unsuccessful
Well,
today.
does this mean eliminating the convention?
I don't think
having the winner of the primaries be the nominee automatically?
There's a lot of talk in the last few days about changes in the whole nominating process, and I think that's going to continue. And I think there's some changes that are within the realm of the possible, politics being the art of the
Senator
possible.
Johnston, give me some examples, because at the moment you've changed your rules again to favor, if anyone, Jesse Jackson for 1992.
Well, I think there are going to have to be some rules changes so that someone who's a more centrist can get the nomination.
What do you favor? Give me some exact.
Well, I would say you need to break up Super Tuesday. You shouldn't have all the South together on that day in March. You ought to have it different. You ought to probably have, why have New Hampshire and Iowa first, always? Why not rotate that around different states? And I have nothing against Iowa and New Hampshire. It's just that every year they're the focus of all the attention. We ought to make it a little more.
And liberal activists in the party, very few of them, set the stage for the rest of the primary season.
Well, that's right. We need to have the centrist who ought to have more of a say in how we nominate.
The two winners in Iowa soon disappeared without a trace.
I was just going to say that seems to me to be one of the important lessons of the 1988 process, and I think we'll see some changes no matter what happens.
Who should be the party chairman? Ron Brown, one of Mr. Jackson's close associates, is widely talked of. Should Paul Kirk stay? What's your preference?
Well, I have some names in mind. But,
spell them out.
But no, it's a little premature for that. What we've got to do is learn to include people in. I think part of the problem is that Jesse Jackson felt like he was excluded from the party and was fighting his way in. Now, we need to welcome Jesse Jackson in and say, all right, now help us solve this problem. Can you get nominated? Look at the polls. And I think the polls would probably say he can't, but let him be part of the process.
If Paul Kirk were willing to take another 4-year term, I'd be happy to support him. I think he's done a good job, but I think it's far more important that we begin to look at message, because I think message really is a problem. We've got to, again, at the presidential level, and I think that part of the distinction that hasn't been made is that we're looking at the rest of the offices and the presidency. And the presidency is about the great war and peace issues, and it's about the economic issues. And until we can reclaim the high ground, which we had over 20 years ago, if we can again become the party of economic opportunity and upward mobility, the party of strength and resolve at home and abroad, the party of citizenship, some of these things that have been lacking in our appeal of late, then we're going to be able to attract the majority of the national electorate. Until we can do that, we're going to continue to win a majority of elections at the state and local level, and we're going to continue to watch the country inaugurate Republican president.
Do your colleagues in the Congress really care about what Senator-elect Robb's talking about the presidency? Are some of them just as content to have a Republican president anyway, because they owe him no deference?
No, they obviously much prefer a Democratic president and willing to fight for it and work for it, and they did. They share our frustration that our process simply doesn't work to get the right man with the right message at the right time nominated.
Let me just say that I think we have made some real progress. We have moved in that direction. Michael Dukakis did better than the last two Democratic nominees. We're moving in the right direction. He attempted to work toward that message. It's just that because
at the very end.
Well, not necessarily throughout the campaign, I would submit, and he was the movement's in the right direction. It's just that we've got a lot further to go than we've acknowledged to date.
Mr. Robb, Senator Johnston, thank you. Thanks for coming. Pleased to have you. Come again.
Thank you.
Coming next, Robert Teeter, co-director of the Bush transition team, planning the White House changeover from Reagan to Bush, in a moment.
Next. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Glad to have you. You've seen that George Will is here and Sam Donaldson are here. Now tell me this, did you expect the Democrats to allow Mr. Bush to have any honeymoon at all?
Well, I think there'll be some honeymoon. I think the Democrats have said on this program and several other places this last week that they look forward to working with the new president, and certainly Vice President Bush has said the same, that he intends to work with the Congress, looks forward to it, and will make every effort to do so.
During the President-elect's first press conference, Britt Hume asked him a question. He said, do you intend to go back to Congress and ask to bring back Contra aid? In the campaign, the Vice President said very little about Contra aid. In the closing weeks, almost nothing about SDI either. Did he use the campaign in a way that would enable him now to go to Congress and say, I got a mandate on these controversial hot issues?
Well, I think so. The Vice President, as you know, got 54% of the votes and well over 400 electoral votes. I think he does have a mandate to run on those things that he campaigned on, and certainly he talked about SDI several times in the campaign. There were several periods where he talked about defense, always emphasized SDI. Whenever asked about Contra aid, made his position very clear. He's always been a strong supporter of the resistance to the Sandinistas, and will certainly continue those policies in office.
Now, I know that you're just at the beginning of this long and complicated transition process, and there's almost nothing you can say, but let me try anyway. One of the suggestions that invariably comes up at a time like this is that in order to extend hands across the ideological seas to the Democrats, it might be nice to put a Democrat in the cabinet. Is there any talk about that?
Well, frankly, George, at this point, there's not very much talk about anything. Craig Fuller and I have only had really about a day and a half or 2 days together to begin to plan the transition. We've only met with the Vice President, had one long meeting with him before he left to take the weekend off, and we open the office, and we'll come back tomorrow and begin to really address that. The Vice President will be back on Tuesday, and that's what I think we'll be doing this week.
Let me ask you about your thoughts concerning the structure of how the White House would work. There's one idea that you and Fuller and perhaps former Governor Johnston would form a troika, much as there was a troika at the first term of the Reagan administration to actually run things below the presidential level. Would that make sense?
Well, I haven't frankly thought a lot about that. I haven't talked to the Vice President about it. I think that's strictly his decision, and he's going to have to decide how he wants his own staff to work. That is the group of people who work the most closely with him, and really we have not discussed that at all.
Well, but during the campaigns run either with a central system of a chief of staff who's all-powerful or with a troika of some sort. During the campaign, you shared power pretty well with a number of people. Why wouldn't it work in the White House?
Well, I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I think we did run the campaign effectively. The Vice President does have his own management style, and I think that he, over this weekend, probably is giving some serious thought as to how he'd like to structure the White House staff and how he thinks it can best serve him.
Do you think George Bush is going to be a hands-on president, or will he follow in the Reagan mold, which is to delegate a lot of power and just come to work in the morning and have people put papers in front of him and say, sign here?
Well, I'm not sure that's a accurate characterization of the Reagan mold, but I think that the Vice President will be a very activist president. I think he'll be one that's involved in a lot of things, but my experience working with him over while he's been Vice President and during the campaign is he's a very good executive in the sense of being able to recruit good people, give them some direction, and then let them go do their job on their own.
Yeah, but let me pursue this. If someone were burrowing down in the basement of a Bush White House, doing things like sending money to the Contras against the law, do you think President Bush would know it, or would he be surprised as President Reagan apparently was surprised?
No, I'm sure he would know it. I think that he likes working with a number of people. He's not going to have a situation, I wouldn't think, where it all funneled through one person. I think he likes direct contact with a number of those people that work for him, high-level officials, both on the White House staff and certainly in the cabinet, and you'll see him very involved in a number of things.
Now, Mr. Teeter, you may not be able to answer this precisely, but I would like to have your thoughts about it anyway. Senator Johnston, who was here a minute ago, may be the Senate Majority Leader if he wins. He is a contestant. He said that he thought in the new term Mr. Bush should have an economic summit. You'd meet with the Democratic leadership and together work out some kind of way of dealing with the debt. Do you think that's a good idea? Would Mr. Bush go for it? And if so, what do you think might come of it?
Well, I think the specifics of whether or not you have an economic summit will be left to the new president, and I'll let him decide that on his own. But at the same time, I think he has said during the campaign, and certainly said in his press conference the day after the election, is that he looked forward to working with the Democratic leadership in the Congress. He thought they could work together. He looked forward to meeting with them, and he thought that was the way to go after this deficit problem.
I want to come back, however, to the question of the use made or the use not made of the campaign to build a mandate. The president-elect was extremely clear on the subject of taxes, no new taxes, and he didn't restrict that just to personal income tax rates. Given that, what is there to negotiate about?
Well, I think there's a whole series of things probably to negotiate about. He really only took two things off the table. He took Social Security off the table for those negotiations, and he took a tax increase off the table. And he proposed his own plan that he called a flexible freeze, which is really a spending cap, limiting the increase in federal spending to only the rate of inflation, and said that if we could do that, then the President and the Congress could negotiate about the priorities within that, increase spending on some areas while decreasing it on others. And if you can do that and keep the economic expansion going, you will reduce the deficit regularly and steadily.
But there are a couple other things off the table anyway. First of all, interest you have to pay, and that's about 14% of the budget. And then the Vice President is committed not to seeing a real decline, I might say a continuing real decline, in defense spending, is he not?
Yes, that's right. I think the Vice President has said he feels that defense spending cannot decline in real terms, that it has got to be held at least where it is and possibly over a 4-year term
so
have some increase.
You have interest, Social Security, and defense. Now that focuses you on discretionary domestic spending that's been under the hoe of Ronald Reagan for 7 years now. What makes you think you can balance the budget, say get $40 billion to meet the Graham-Rudman target of $100 billion out of that tiny patch of the garden?
Well, because that's where the spending increases have been dramatically. There have been huge increases in those areas over the past 15 or 20 years. They have not been pulled back down to where government spending is anywhere near what it has historically been. It's increased to a point where it's 24% or so of GNP now. And the Vice President, I think, believes that that can be lowered.
Mr. Teeter, the election seems like it was a year ago. It was actually only 5 or 6 days ago, and let me bring you back to it. There were a lot of stories early in the week that the Bush camp was worried, that in fact they saw something happening out there and that there was some apprehensiveness. Is that ever the case, or did you know you had it locked all along?
Well, we were very confident that we would be able to assemble the 270 electoral votes and somewhat more than that. But at the same time, we did go through that period over the last 7 or 8 days of the campaign where we had some very artificially high leads that had been there in states really since the second debate, and they began to pull themselves back into kind of more normal looks for those states, and that means our lead came down, and certainly that does cause you some concern, and you watch it carefully. But at every point in the campaign, right up through Election Day, I think we were fairly confident that we had well enough to do something in excess of the 270 electoral votes that we needed.
A lot of people, including a lot of prominent Democrats, have said simply that you out-campaigned Michael Dukakis and company, which suggests that maybe this was an election won on tactics. Do you agree it was won on tactics?
No, I don't agree with that at all, and I don't think either of the first two segments of this program, Peter Hart, the two senators you just had on, neither one of them agreed with that. They both, I think, said, all of them, Michael Barone, that it was a campaign where message was important. The Vice President went into it believing message was important. He believes that
but the message is a tactic, isn't it?
Well, the tactics are one of the ways that you communicate the message, but certainly you can't communicate a faulty message successfully enough to win. He has believed for a long time that ideas and ideology are important.
Mr. Teeter, thank you. Thanks very much for coming in today. Pleased to have you with us. Hope you come back again soon. Coming next, our discussion here among our bruised, battered veterans of a solid year, and in fact more than that, of presidential politics, all of whom say they're glad it's over, but I'm not so sure they mean it. And joining us will be Cokie Roberts, ABC News special correspondent, in a moment.
The Senate for all kinds of reasons, mainly having to do with money and media coverage. But the House of Representatives is not only firmly in Democratic hands, but I think stays that way because we also saw a whole lot of state legislatures go into Democratic hands this time, and the 1990 census will be conducted while they are in office, and they keep the Democrats in power in the House.
Another element in this that we have not looked at, our guests have, George Bush and the new 101st Congress. Are they going to be able to agree on anything, would you guess, Sam?
Well, I don't think they'll agree on much. At the moment, the Democrats are saying they're willing to cooperate. They hope that Bush will come forward with education programs and all the rest. But in fact, they hold the whip hand there. And it's not going to be like '81, when Ronald Reagan was the 800-pound gorilla. He scared those Democrats to death. He waved a bedsheet at them, and they ran for the corners and the closets.
He waved a mandate at them. He said, I campaigned on lower taxes and rearmament of the country. They said, all right, voters approved. What did George Bush campaign on?
The flag, a Massachusetts furlough program, and read my lips.
Willie Horton is in deep trouble for the next 8 years.
Now, I think it's going to be warfare from the first day.
You think Willie Horton will ever get another weekend pass?
I don't think so. Maybe the Republican convention 4 years from now is an act of gratitude.
But this idea that we can allow stalemate on the budgetary problem because the president won't look at revenues and the Democrats won't try to push in that direction, I think is well, it may happen, but I think it's very destructive.
George, you had a litany going a minute ago about the interest, Social Security, and defense, and leaving very little for them to argue about. So what's the conclusion of that? New taxes will be essential if they're serious about the deficit?
The American people want the tax code they've got, which generates about 19% of GNP to the government. They want to be a social insurance state and a superpower. That costs about 23% of GNP. You got a problem there. Now, you said to the senators, and you're right, Congress is involved in this as well, but let's put one fact on the table. If you take the middle 6 years of Ronald Reagan's budgets, he proposed 13/14 of these deficits. Congress added over a 6-year period the paltry sum of $90 billion. It's small change in Washington.
Yeah, one of them said here that they always voted less than Ronald Reagan asked. I think that is not true. They always voted more.
But it's a trivial amount more, David. The president
I know, but it's more.
It's in total, it's not because of the question of defense. If you take defense out, it becomes a different budget. But
no, one other thing before we go. The stock market this past week dropped, what, 47 points?
Well, one day it dropped 47. I think for the total week it dropped almost 80 or 90 points.
So what is that all about?
Well, the conventional wisdom was that if George Bush won, Wall Street would be delighted. I'm not saying that they're not delighted, but I must tell you that Bush's victory had no salutary effect on the market, just the opposite. They're worried about interest rates. They're worried about the decline of the dollar overseas again. They're afraid this administration, and the administration denies it. I mean, Bush has already sent a signal, wants to let the dollar lower, and Bush says he doesn't. I think that'll sort of even out. The market, you know, is just kind of kooky when it comes to these weekly swings.
I'm not sure. I don't know what it means. I wonder if anyone does. Do you know,
Let me
George?
take a stab at it. If you take the vice president at his word, no new taxes, and if you take Congress at their political self-interest that they're not going to go first on taxes, then America voted last Tuesday to get poorer for 4 years because we're going to consume more than we produce. We're going to continue borrowing it from abroad. We're going to continue mortgaging the future. We're going to get poorer. And maybe they've got calculators on Wall Street to figure that out.
Well, maybe so. You got 15 seconds.
The deficit is their concern. And clearly this election says that the American people are not as interested in curing the deficit as they are in protecting what they've got.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. We'll see you all next week, and we'll be back with a few sort of final words in a moment. Briefly and in passing, that we started this Sunday program 7 years ago this week, which is a pretty long time by television standards. For George and Sam and me, and for those like Cokie Roberts who join us from time to time, we'd like to thank you for tuning us in. And our guests, hundreds of them, who have come in on Sundays and either answered our questions or evaded them. For all of us, until next week, and we trust for another 7 years, thank you.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From satellites to medical systems, we bring good things to life. And by Merrill Lynch, where relationships are built.
Budget deficit.
If foreigners stay worried, they could sell off more U.S. holdings, and then
our inflation rate would shoot up.